One of my favorite games of all time is finally coming to the Nintendo Switch in a better way than I could have ever imagined. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is getting a full-blown remake in HD, and I cannot express just how excited I am for it. So, of course, you know what that means. It's time we boot up the old analysis machine to see what secrets and hidden details we can find. We're going to comb over everything we can about this game. So let's get right into it, starting off with the updated visual art style of the game. The environmental art style builds off of the recent Paper Mario games, like Color Splash and Origami King, and it truly looks like a world made of paper in a diorama. You can see the folds and seams and various objects and buildings. You can even see how boxes look like they were folded up. The way objects are held up and put against each other look just like they were handcrafted. And many areas look like they're made out of cardboard. Even the water fits with the visual style, rather than looking like, well, realistic fluid water. And most of the grounds seem to be very shiny and reflective, almost like there was a finish applied to the diorama, to keep it held together. Of course, we'll get more into the beautiful visuals of the game as we get to the frame-by-frame analysis. But before then, it's not only the environment that has been updated, but the characters too. Unlike the recent Paper Mario games, the characters are handled pretty differently. No longer do they have the thick white outline. Rather than a sort of stop-motion style with cut-out paper characters, the characters are extremely faithful to the original game, now more like layered paper puppets, with fluid expressive movements rather than a bunch of paper sprites. But, that being said, they do still look like they're made out of paper. We can see the thin edges of their character models too, with the thin white edge basically being the thin side of the paper that wasn't decorated. It's a charming touch that really pushes the art style, and really makes them feel like they're made of paper. Take Mario for example. We can see how his arms, hands, and boots are attached to his body separately, so they can all be moved independently. This goes for pretty much every other character as well. This was how the original game handled it too, but now the updated art style just complements it even more. And speaking of being extremely faithful, there's not a single redesign here. Unlike the Mario and Luigi remakes, the character designs are just like the original game. There were unique toads all over the place, as well as Goombas, Koopas, and more. Any fears of the game being simplified to the styles of more recent Paper Mario games are totally gone. The diverse designs are back. The Super Mario RPG remake was the first to keep this promise, so it's great to see it here in Thousand Year Door as well. And heck, even characters that have since had redesigns are sticking with the old style. Take Princess Peach for example, who is surprisingly still back in her old Nintendo 64 era dress. In fact, there were even new characters in this style too. This purple Toad in Glitzville is completely new. The design is fitting to Glitzville as well, since he's dressed like a martial artist. Maybe we'll see other colors of Toads dressed like this. And surely, this single Toad isn't the only new design we'll see. What else could we get in terms of new characters? Of course, plenty of characters also have brand new art and animations that they didn't have in the original game. We have shocked expressions for Yoshi and Goombella, a determined expression for Flurry as she prepares an attack, battle-ready poses for the enemy Goombas when entering battle, shocked expressions for more NPCs, such as the XS Express cast, including the thinking pose for Pennington, and even a shocked pose for the hot dog salesman in Glitzville. There's a lot more expressions than there were before, and from more than just Mario too. It's pretty great, and really sells the world too, making it feel like all of these characters are actually going to react to what's going on. And obviously, if we see these for some of the party members, we can naturally assume that all the party members will be treated this way, and even some more NPCs. Additionally, many characters now have a back view, like Mario and Peach did in the original game. We see the back of many party members, follower characters like Professor Frankly, Bowser, and even these crowd members in Glitzville. They all have a view from behind now, rather than being forced to always face the camera. There's one more area with exciting, notable changes, and that's the music and audio. So let's take a moment to observe these more closely, because we actually hear quite a lot in this trailer. The trailer opens with the opening notes to the Thousand Year Door opening. Then it turns into the title theme to the original Paper Mario, which is odd because this song wasn't anywhere in the Thousand Year Door before. But it doesn't replace the Thousand Year Door's title theme, because we hear that later in the trailer. So where does this song appear now then? Well, maybe, like in the original Paper Mario, a little demo plays on the title screen if left open too long, and maybe this song plays then. This is definitely one of the more curious things of the trailer. If a song from the original Paper Mario on the N64 is being used in a trailer for the Thousand Year Door, where does this song play? It'll be a little disappointing if it was just in a trailer. Anyway, the next few songs that we hear are new arrangements of songs from Thousand Year Door, such as Petal Meadows, the Thousand Year Door's battle theme, Bowser's theme, and the title theme to Thousand Year Door. All of these sound great, and are mostly the same, though they do have more depth to the song thanks to more instruments in this new arrangement. But the end of the trailer has one that's much more interesting. We can hear Peach's theme that's played during her playable segments. The tone sounds much more tranquil and peaceful than it did before. The song itself is also now much slower, because originally the song was much more upbeat, almost plucky and childish. Hear the difference? It's pretty different. And this says a lot about the new soundtrack. It won't just be one-to-one with the original instruments. Some of these songs may be completely new arrangements that capture a completely different tone than the original did. In terms of other audio, there's also a bunch of character voices. Notably, Mario's voice clips appear identical to the original game. So they're probably reused, and therefore still Charles Martinet. But additionally, there's no generic dialogue noise when NPCs are talking, like in other games. Luigi and Peach make noises that sound similar to their actual voice clips. Bowser's voice might also be reused from the original. Rather than playing small clips as the dialogue scrolls, he has laughs and clips that play when the bubble pops up in general. Koops makes Koopa Troopa noises while talking. Professor Franklin makes Goomba noises while talking. Heck, the Yoshi Kid makes noises similar to classic Yoshi sounds while talking. And probably my favorite here is that Dupless in Mario's body makes noises that are kinda similar to Mario's voice clips when he talks. But it's not all consistent, however. Goombella doesn't sound like a Goomba. Her voice, so to say, sounds softer, like Peach's, but it's not quite the same sound. Plus, what about the characters that never had voices? Like the X-Nauts, Vivian, and so many others. So maybe there are still some generic sounds that'll be used by some characters. That being said, I really hope the Piantas make noises from Sunshine. I would love to hear their text derived from their ridiculous voice clips. Come on, it would be hilarious. Alright, now that we've talked at length about the updated art style, the characters, and even the audio, it's time we start taking a closer look at this trailer scene by scene. So, starting off with the start of the trailer, the opening book scene. The book is still placed on a wooden desk, with a light cast on it. Rather than some random letter or paper off to the left, there's a pair of envelopes, neither of which are invites to Super Smash Bros. And there's still a dark green book in the upper right corner, but now it's unmarked. We can now see what's probably the foot of the desk lamp in the upper left corner as well. The book itself is far more detailed. It's still the crimson red color, but now the accents are in a metallic gold rather than bright yellow. And the open edges of the book now look more metallic as well. The squares and circle aren't just a pattern on the surface of the cover either. Now they're clearly indentations, and the golden star in the center is raised. We don't see any of the opening narration on screen as the camera slowly zooms towards the book, nor as it opens, but that may just be for the cinematic portion of the trailer here, meaning it'll probably still be there in the actual opening of the game. Moving on to the next shot, which shows us the outside of Mario's house. It's pretty much the same as the original opening to the game. The trees and brush that move out of the way to view Mario's house now appear to be in 3D, and we can clearly see the warp pipe off to the right. In the original Paper Mario, this connected to Toad Town. The grass here is pretty shiny, but keeps the checkered pattern from the original, although it's now very subtle. The hills in the background are a bit more detailed instead of just being silhouettes. One in particular has a bunch of trees on it, a type of mountain we see throughout the trailer. It gives the impression of a far-off wooden mountain. The mailbox over here has been given a slight redesign. It now has a red flag on the side. The top is still blue, though the base now matches the white of the rest of the main body. There's no longer a slot for the mail to go into though, so perhaps the front opens up instead? The porch is also changed a bit. While it's still a couple of steps up and made to look like wood, the railing and banister have changed, now looking more like flat cardboard or paper rather than the thick slabs of wood from before. And Mario's house itself is also a bit different, kind of. It still says Mario on the front, with the green door, yellow walls, and red roof. But now there's a teal-green back of the house, standing taller than the front half. And as it turns out, this matches the design of the house from the original Paper Mario. Plus, the light over the door is now transparent, actually looking like a light that could turn on. It's nice to see that the house from Thousand Year Door was redesigned to better match up with the house from the original Paper Mario. Anyway, Parakarry flies in just like in the original Thousand Year Door, though it seems to be a bit faster now. Unfortunately, we don't see him actually deliver the mail. Moving on to the inside of Mario's house, it looks almost identical to the original game, save for the obvious updated art style. The chairs and table now look like they're folded out of cardboard. There are lots of red and green objects for the brothers, such as the mugs on the table, the toothbrushes, and some other objects that are put away in the background. The wood floor is very shiny too, as we can make out Luigi's reflection. There's a framed picture in the background of Mario's partners from the first Paper Mario game on the N64, and this picture was first used in Super Paper Mario, the game after TTYD, and the large map hung up on the wall is clearly the map from the same game. We're not really sure what it was meant to be originally, but it's nice to see that now it's a further reference to the original Paper Mario. Moving on to Princess Peach's letter. The actual letter from Princess Peach isn't shown on the screen anymore, nor is the text box styled like it was from the written letter. Instead, we have the text displayed in a sort of clouded bubble up at the top of the screen. The view of Rogueport, however, is the same, though the water now looks very different, but it is still reflective. We can see Rogueport's reflection, as well as the tree line in the background. The blimp is still in the background, and Flavio's ship is in the port. It's still clearly a more low-poly, distant view of the city. But the overall movement of the scene is very nice. The flow of water, slight motions on the blimp, the wind in the sails of the ship as it rises and sinks with the water. Even though it's a distant, low-poly model, it still feels like a living view of the city. It's just nice. Moving on to the next scene at Rogueport Port, the wind-up boat that Mario arrived on does the same sort of page flip animation to turn around, The top of the boat now spins as small puffs of smoke come out of it. The NPCs in the area are exactly the same. An orange sailor toad, the green sailor toad, Papatch, and a couple of sailor bombs. Although Papatch now keeps his eye patch on his left eye, even when facing to the right. The ground here looks much noticeably dirtier. Rogueport is always a trashy city in some parts, but the remake really accentuates this detail. There's different colors of spills on the ground, brightly colored torn up papers and scraps everywhere. It feels much more notably messy at first glance than the original did. Also, the cobblestone patterned ground looks much more scratched up. Additionally, the chain fence around the port is new, and different than the metal fences used before. Moving on to Goombella's introduction, there's a bit of a script change here. Goombella's exact line is different. Previously, she said she was a student at the university, but now she specifically says that she's a junior, meaning she's 1 year out from graduating. And the visuals of Rogueport are still just as messy around the town square. We can see loose papers blowing on the breeze in the background sometimes. There's wanted posters on the wall next to the item shop, with a pretty hefty reward of 2 million coins. What the heck did this Koopa do? Anyway, the graffiti in the back alley is much brighter than it was before, and the logos for the item shop and the inn are the same. We can also see from a later clip that shows this same exact scene from slightly earlier that the noose is indeed back in the square, and it isn't just the wooden platform in the center. Rogueport still has the gallows here. It's great to see they aren't really changing anything about this game. Could we see the chalk outline of a toad from the Japanese version of the game? There were also some of the same NPCs in the background. A mouser on the left and a Goomba on the right. There may be more like before, but since they walk around, they may simply be off-screen currently. Specifically, a second Goomba and this Dugan. But a big change in this part is the mob hit. We can see the two Piantas in the background pop out from the alley and make their way towards the pair of craws near the safe block. We don't actually see the mob hit happen in the trailer, but compared to this point of the original game, it's playing out differently. Originally, we see the Piantas pop out as Mario and Goombella start talking about the legendary treasure. Then they stay at the corner for a while, and as soon as Toadsworth makes his entrance, the craws walk into view, and the Piantas strike. But now, we can see from just moments before that the craws show up first this time. First there's one by the save block, then the other walks up to his pier. And while Goombella is introducing herself, the Piantas begin to sneak up on the unsuspecting pair. So could this sequence happen much earlier now? Perhaps it's no longer tied to the dialogue progressing between Mario and Goombella, and instead it just happens over time in the background. Or perhaps the setup for the hit happens earlier in the scene, but the actual attack doesn't happen until Toadsworth shows up. Or worse, could this mean a change to Toadsworth actually making an appearance? Well, probably not, since everything else about the game is largely unchanged. So Toadsworth is probably still here. Moving on to the next clip, which takes us to the Petal Meadows entrance. The stone warp pipe is now much lighter than it was before, and the trees back here are now 3D objects, clearly folded together from several pieces. Honestly, the surrounding area really looks like it popped out of a diorama. The way the grass curls over the edge of the rocks, and the way the folds in the rocks are seen, really sell the crafted paper aesthetic here. Everything just looks so detailed. The clouds in the background are much larger and puffy, and we can see sunbeams from the upper corner radiating down. And just before the scene cuts away, not only can we see the rock where the moonstone gets placed, but we can even make out a small part of Hooktail's castle in the background. Moving on to the next clip, which takes us to Petalburg. The shrubbery and vines look much less realistic, and now fit the crafted papery art style. The NPCs here have also changed a bit. We can still see the flower of the bubble down here, but there's a Koopa Troopa over here on the right who wasn't here before. In the original game, the only Koopa Troopa NPC found outside of a house in this area of Petalburg was on the left side of the bridge, but this one is on the right. And when they cross the bridge, it doesn't look like there's a Koopa over here on the left side at all. So it's probably the same Koopa Troopa, but now he's on the right side of the bridge instead. The Toad is also missing, though perhaps he's just wandering around off screen. But regardless of the bigger Toad, the Fire Emblem Kid is missing. That's right, the Toad Kid that talks about this awesome game called Fire Emblem isn't seen anywhere. He normally hangs out around the save block, but it seems that he's gone. Okay, being a little less dramatic about it now, it's possible that these missing NPCs are hanging out further to the right, since we don't see the loading zone to the next part of town. So they may just be off-screen. Or they may be relocated to a different part of town, just like the Koopa Troopa was. Basically, it seems that the NPCs of each area aren't one-to-one with the original game, possibly being moved around or changed entirely. And some more clips give credit to this idea too. Anyway, in the next scene, we see Mario and Goombella talking with Professor Frankly. And this quote from the legend being told by Frankly is actually different. Although it's not the text that's different, it's who's saying it. In the original game, this was actually said by Goombella, telling it to the professor. So why was this changed? It's possible this was changed to make Professor Frankly seem more like the expert on the subject, and perhaps we'll see some more changes made to the script, rather than a direct adaptation of the original game. We've already seen some small changes in Goombella's earlier dialogue, after all. Maybe we'll see some bigger changes like this, where entire lines come from different characters. Anyway though, Frankly's study is also much more dimly lit than it was in the original game, which better sells the idea of him being a cooped up bookworm. And we can make out details on the book on his desk. We can see a large star in the lower corner, as well as a couple of dark pictures on the right. It's hard to say what any of this really means, but it's nice to see that there's actually something written in the book he keeps opening throughout the game. Moving on, we have Mario, Goombella, and Professor Frankly at the 1,000-Year Door. We can make out that the magical map actually depicts the locations of the game. We always knew it depicted them, but it's nice to actually be able to make that out on the item sprite this time around. The glowing effect around the pedestal is much more luminous and magical in appearance now than it was before. And the 1,000-Year Door itself looks much more grand and fancy, although the design itself is the same. The camera spinning around Mario while the magical map floats in the air is much faster now, though it's possible that this is just for the trailer. And as we mentioned earlier, more characters now have back sprites, as we can more clearly see that Professor Frankly and Goombella are watching Mario on the pedestal. Notably, it seems there is no more save block in this room. Normally there's one near the front of the room, towards the left side, near the path to the Pit of 100 Trials. Maybe it's been moved to either just before this chamber, or is now in the room with the Pit of 100 Trials. It's hard to say, but we don't see it in this spin around of the room in the remake. Next up, we have Mario, Goombella, and Punio walking through the Boggly Woods. This area looks stunning now, with beautiful golden lighting from the background, and the way it reflects off the ground gives a rainbowy shine. We can see white flowers get kicked up as Mario walks through the flower beds, rather than just when he jumps. And we can also see the shadow sirens in the background, watching Mario as he walks by. But that's about it for this scene. And then we see Mario and Goombella in Creepy Steeple. The light shines through the beautiful stained glass windows, as boos float all over the screen. And notably, the boos seem a bit more spread out now, maybe to keep the camera feel more focused on Mario. Or they could just be randomly all over, and in this particular clip, or this particular run through Creepy Steeple, they're not all over the screen. Next up, we have Mario and Goombella walking up the tower of Hooktail Castle. The long, rolling hills in all directions as the tower is climbed really help sell the height this time around. Previously, they were much more distant and part of the skybox. And more of the castle itself can be seen while climbing the winding tower as well. Also, the windows of the tower have damaged bars. Moving on to this clip of Mario ground pounding the Switch in Glitzville. The faithful recreation in the area really shines through since we can see the box even has the same blue sticker with the red star, just like it did in the original game. It's a small, negligible detail, but one that exemplifies just how faithful this remake is with the minor details. The Traveling Sisters 3 can be seen in the background, and behind the sign for the juice bar is an ink coupon, exactly where it was in the original game. Of course, the biggest detail about this shot is the brand new Purple Toad, but we already talked about him. But as a result of this ground pound, we can see that the puzzle animations are much faster in the remake. Seriously, let's compare how quickly these stairs are built in the original, and here in the remake. Yeah, that doesn't just seem sped up at all for the trailer, so that's pretty good. As the stairs get built, we can see into the window of the juice bar this time. These were previously opaque, but now we can see the structure inside, as well as Podler, the manager. Also, we can see the sign in front says Fresh Juice Oolong, and we can also make out a star piece underneath the Rockhawk sign, behind the trampoline. which is, once again, an item in the exact place it was found before. Next up, we see Mario and Goombella flip through the secret alleyway in Rookport. The fence on this eastern side of Rookport is much taller than it was before, now somewhat obscuring the view of the pathway. We can still see the bandit here and Arthur the Green Dugan. Plus, we can just barely make out Gus the Craw on the other side of the doorway to the left. So Mario either paid him to pass or beat him up in battle. The Trouble Center now has a sign above the door, perhaps to help it stand out more as a point of interest. And the footprints leading up to the secret alleyway are much more obvious this time around. Moving on, we have Mario turning into a paper airplane at Hooktail Castle. The partner jumps into Mario's pocket much earlier in the animation now compared to the original game, but otherwise, this section seems pretty much identical to the original. So, moving on to when Madame Flurry first appears. The roses that decorate the screen in this scene look much more realistic, and the camera is much more zoomed in on Flurry herself, focusing more on her upper body and head rather than keeping all of her in view. And then we see Flurry's ability getting used in the Great Tree. The wind she blows looks much faster now in its animation, and we can see that they're blowing the 100 punies across the gap to the other side. The punies themselves have a more distinct look in the bubbles now too. Not only are the bubbles themselves more transparent, but the punies are in a sort of shocked animation. Their pupils are smaller, the legs are bent, and their antennae are sort of curled, rather than in the original where they kept a default idle stance. The tree trunk in the center of the room looks more distinct now too, and we can see purple water pouring out of it now, which is basically the source of the bubbles. The pedestal to place the puny orb has also been slightly redesigned, now looking like it fits into an indentation rather than sitting on top. The glowing square for the punies to gather in also has a distinct design now, rather than just being a faintly glowing square in front of the pedestal. There are also these small set of rectangles off to the left of it, probably to indicate where Mario needs to stand to first blow the punies into the bubbly water. And notably, the UI indicator for the punies is missing at the bottom of the screen, but this may just be for the trailer, as many games remove UI elements to reduce clutter for trailers. Next up, we have Mario and Goombella talking with Koops outside of Petalburg. We can see a question block on the left, with some slight folds and imperfections in its shape, again, selling the handcrafted aesthetic of the game. There are some butterflies off to the right as well, and as we mentioned before, Koops speaks with sounds similar to the noises Koopa Troopas make, but otherwise, there's not too much else to say about this clip. So, moving on, we have Mario using Koops in Hooktail Castle. The bars in the windows are still ruined, though the exact patterns are different. The stone block to the right of Mario has a bunch of scuff marks and dirt along the edges, making it appear pretty old. And we can see some long cobwebs along the wall too. In the original, these were instead large spiderwebs in the corners. Anyway, when Mario uses Koops, we can see a green ring appears on the ground under him, but it disappears as Koops returns. So maybe it would indicate his origin point? So if you held the button to keep Koops out in place, it would show where he would return to? And the animation for the stairs swapping directions seems much faster here in the remake, as pointed out earlier with different puzzle-solving animations. We can see one of the special switches on the right as well, now also looking like it's crafted out of cardboard. Next up, we have Mario meeting the mini Yoshi in Glitzville, specifically the default Yoshi kid, the green one. Though this is the only one we see, I'm sure we'll still get the other colors in too. The minor league locker room still looks like a rundown mess, with holes in the walls and floor and damaged lockers. And the communication device on the wall now more clearly resembles a Game Boy Advance. While it resembled one in the original game, this time around, it's just straight up a large GBA mounted to the wall. Oh, and as mentioned earlier, Yoshi's voice sounds a bit like Yoshi voice clips. And then we see Mario riding Yoshi in Rookport. The exact sound effect for Yoshi's flutter jump sounds different, but beyond that, there isn't much else to say about this clip. So, moving on, we now get to enter battle in Petal Meadows. But before the battle itself starts, the flowers around the area are now more like a bunch of weeds or bushes, and the exclamation point over the Goomba has depth to it now. We can see the shadow on the white bubble, and when the enemy spots Mario, it strikes a small pose before pursuing him. Then upon entering battle, Mario takes a battle-ready pose as the curtain falls. And thus, the curtain rises for battle. Everything on the stage starts off folded down, before being assembled and lifted into place, while the audience fills in the seats. It's a charming touch that the back of these props are unpainted white, making them feel like real theater props, where only what you're supposed to see is what gets detailed. And down in the audience, we can see Toads, Goombas, and Shy Guys. The stage we see most throughout the trailer is specifically the first one in the game, when Mario's rank is Rising Star, which caps at an audience size of 50. The UI is significantly cleaner than it was before, as it now makes better use of the widescreen, with the entire HUD fitting in a single clean row up top. While before they looked like bookmarks or ribbons, now they look like folder tabs. Mario and his partner's HP are up first on the left in pink, then FP in yellow, then Star Power in blue, Star Points or EXP in green, and Coins also in green. The UI also doesn't have the little X anymore next to Star Points or Coins, and they're also on separate tabs now. Overall, they take up less screen space and fit more cleanly. We can also see during battle that when it's Mario's turn, his partner's health UI darkens, helping put the focus on the current active character. At the bottom left, we see the number of audience members now displayed with 3 white silhouettes rather than a single dark one. And in the lower right are 2 other buttons, A to confirm the menu option, and the plus button to tattle check. Presumably, this would open the bestiary, or tattlelog, to see the details on enemies already tattled, to see their stats and get the little flavor text about them. This shouldn't replace the tattle system though. Presumably, Goombella still needs to use tattle on enemies in battle to add them to the log. Anyway, in the original game, this fight in particular was against 4 Goombas, but now we can see it's against 5. So the exact structure of the battles may also be different from the original game. As they enter, they strike a ready pose against Mario, before the battle itself begins, which is a nice little detail. Pressing the Y button will swap Mario and his partner's order in battle, which is the same as before, but now it's displayed in green rather than the original gray. The exact battle options otherwise look identical to the original game, albeit higher quality bubbles, jump being the default, then hammer, item, special, and tactics. As Mario goes to jump on the Goomba, the A button gets displayed in red. The description for the attack has changed too, previously saying, press A just before stomping on an enemy, but now saying, press A at the exact moment you stomp on an enemy. This new description feels a bit more accurate to how the action command actually works, too. Like the more recent Paper Mario games, the attacks are also more flashy. As Mario bounces on the Goomba, we can see colorful speed lines appear on the screen while the crowd cheers, which is just some nice visual feedback to make the attacks feel good. And as Mario performs action commands, we can see the roulette from the original game is still here on the right too. So we'll still be trying to get a bingo for bonus effects in battle. And the next clip shows us even more of the same battle. We can see Goombella was ordered to defend, while the Goomba targets Mario for an attack. At the exact moment the Goomba hits Mario, Mario performs a super guard. In the original game, this was done by hitting the B button when defending instead of pressing the A button, though the window was tighter. It might be the same here, but we don't know for sure. The super guard even has unique text this time. Originally, it simply displayed "Great." Next up, we have the giant blooper appearing in Rogueport sewers. This clip is near identical to the original, aside from the better graphics of course. Goombella now has a shot pose just like Mario, and we can see the platform for the pipe to Petal Meadows is now grassy, which better represents its destination, rather than looking like the rest of the sewer underground. And then we see the giant blooper in battle, where Mario and Goombella both take damage to the ink attack, and the visuals for it look pretty good. But there isn't much else to say here. Although, surprisingly, Mario has a full audience of 50 Toads, even though normally there aren't many spectators for this early game mini-boss. And next we have a battle in Boggly Woods, where we can see the stage decorations can still fall over onto characters in battle and damage them, just like in the original game. So next up we have Flurry in the Glitz Pit. We can see Flurry using Lip Lock on a Hammer Bro. While the specific action command minigame is the same of pressing A only when the star lights up, the exact layout is different. There's a portion on the gauge that's marked with an arrow, perhaps an indicator that if you pass that point, the attack will be successful, and anything further is extra damage and strength. But failing to reach that arrow will result in failure. It's the pass or fail point, basically. And looking out to the audience are Koopa Troopas, Dullbones, Punies, and even Luigi, who are all audience members that we could see in the original game. Next up, we have Yoshi battling 3 Poison Pokies in Riverside Station. Yoshi's specifically using his Stampede attack, where the action command involves alternating L and R, or in this new version of the game, ZL and ZR. The action command also marks a point on the gauge, likely once again the pass or fail marker. And notably in this clip, Mario has reached the B-list star rank, which we can tell by the stage. The curtains are now blue, and the audience is larger. There are spotlights along the edge of the stage, and the speaker systems are much larger too. And as the camera zooms out, we can see the audience is composed of Dullbones, Punies, Boos, and Piranha Plants. But moving out of Mario's battles and over to Bowser, the overall design of this view of Bowser's castle is the same as the original game, but the glow-up is fantastic. The castle itself looks more formidable than before, and somewhat larger too. The lava also looks more prominent, glowing a bright orange. And as we watch Bowser yell at Kemi Koopa, the exact quote has been changed from airhead to lunkhead, and the word bubble is now much more spiky rather than a normal bubble, probably to indicate that he's yelling. And the inside of Bowser's castle is much more dimly lit and dark, better fitting of Bowser's castle. And this portrait of Bowser on the back wall was here in the original, but a funny detail we never noticed back then, that we can clearly see now, is that he has a mustache. And before we move on, shout out to Kemi Koopa, by the way. This was the last game she was ever in, nearly 20 years ago, so it's great to see her again. Anyway, moving on to the first 2D Bowser level, the level once again has a much more crafted look to it, like the rest of the remake, and the UI is much cleaner than it was before along the top. And the controls can now be seen at the bottom left. A to jump, B to use Bowser's Fire Breath, A while mid-jump to ground pound, and over on the far right we can see plus to pause. And Super Bowser is now depicted with a rainbowy effect, rather than just glowing bright yellow. We also get our first look at an X-Naut here. Nothing particularly special, but it's our first look at them here in the remake. And after completing the 2D section, we now have Bowser in Petalburg, and as we mentioned earlier, he now has a back sprite that we can see as he climbs up to the window. Otherwise, this scene plays out exactly as it did in the original, from what we can see, though it does let us see the rest of this area of Petalburg. But moving back to Mario, we can see that the ride to Glitzville and the Blimp is a little bit different than it was in the original game. For starters, we can actually see the whole party in the Blimp. It's a small detail, but it's great to see that we may get scenes with all of the party out at once, rather than just whoever the current active party member is. Otherwise, the animation of the blimp rising to the clouds also looks very nice, and from a different view than it was in the original game. Next up, we have Mario and Koops in Hooktail Castle, specifically standing against the Red Bones mini-boss. The blue pile of bones can be seen in the background on the left, as well as a few others. But, of course, an army of dull bones are dropping in from the ceiling. Further in the background behind the bars, we can see an item, but not quite the same item as the original game. Previously, this was the castle key, which was a pink key shaped like a crown. But now, it's a green key with a different shape entirely. It's likely still a key for the castle, but I wonder why it was redesigned. But moving on, we then have Mario getting cursed. The face of the black chest sits in the background, and the whole patterned background also appears to be part of a diorama. We can see the curvature along the back as it encompasses both the floor and the wall. So presumably, anytime the entire screen gets taken up by a special area, it may look like this. So we may see the partner introduction screens, as well as the new item tutorial screens, all looking similar to this. Anyway, the curse animation is different from the original game. Previously, the screen simply flashed several times, although that's definitely more of an epilepsy concern. So now we see Mario get struck by lightning, turning into a scorched silhouette as he's given new powers. Next up, we have Mario and Goombella entering an item shop. This gives us a great look at how the buildings still unfold as you enter them to reveal the interiors. And even these parts of the buildings have depth. The unfolding actually feels natural to the design, which is great. Anyway, there is another Toad in the shop now too, separate from the shopkeeper. In fact, this may be the same Toad that was previously outside the shop, near the bridge. So maybe Fire Emblem Kid is still around here somewhere. Maybe NPCs really are just moved around. Anyway, Nifty's shop still has the exact same items as it did in the original game, for the same prices too. 8 coins for a Fire Flower, 5 coins for a POW Block, 5 coins for a Courage Shell, 8 coins for a Mr. Softener, 5 coins for a Honey Syrup, and 4 coins for a Mushroom. We can also make out drawings on the boxes over here, including a pair of fruit and a little animal. And next, we have Mario and Goombella in the Rogueport main square once again. We did talk about this scene a bit earlier, as it's part of the same scene in the game's prologue, so there isn't much else to say on it. So we're gonna move on to Mario and Koops in Petal Meadows, just after Koops joins the party, and we can see that Koopy Koo is upset at him. At first, we see that she's sad, before angrily going into her shell and striking the pair. Also, we can make out a star piece in the background, just like in the original game. So it seems pretty likely that many of these collectible item locations will be the same as before. Next up, we have Mario and Yoshi in Twilight Town. Specifically, right when we see one of the residents get turned into a pig. The pigs now have a clear papercraft 3D look to them. And as mentioned earlier, Yoshi takes on a surprised look here, just like Mario. Also, Mario's pose in particular is new to this game, or at least this scene, but it was previously in Origami King and Color Splash. Also, the lighting of the scene better sells the Twilight part of the name too. Everything casts a long shadow. And then we have Mario in the crowded lobby of the Glitz Pit. The crowd now have back sprites, as we mentioned earlier, and notably, Mario still has to hammer his way through the crowd. This is also the only time in the trailer we actually see Mario use his hammer, which we can make out is still a sprite like the original game, rather than the 3D look it's taken on in the recent entries. The lights inside the Glitz Pit now have a golden glow to them as well, making the entire place feel much more fancy than it did before. And we can see a Toad Kid on the left too, so they definitely weren't replaced. The father and son are here just like in the original game in fact, as is the security guard in the background. And these posters in the background are nearly identical to the original game, except Rockhawk's poster now strikes a battle-ready pose, and it looks a lot cooler than it did before. And moving on, we have Mario and Koops encountering Miss Mouse. This scene is nearly identical to the original, except for some animation changes, such as Koops turning with Mario, which now feels more accurate. But Miss Mouse also has a little animation as she does her backflip. And of course, the lighting and the graphics are much better here for this scene. Next up, we have Mario with a crowd in the XS Express. Everyone here is really expressive, which is such a great touch. We can also see the dialogue coming from each of them, rather than a bubble with no pointer. Though, curiously, the mystery that everyone is reacting to is supposed to be about this galley pot that was stolen, but we can still see it on the stove here. Maybe there's a second one? Or it's a good reminder that this game isn't complete yet, and is still in development, so some of the things, including what we mentioned here, might be changed. So, moving on, we have the bouncing egg in Glitzville. The hot dog stand is much more detailed than it was in the original game, and we can see the hot dog salesman is also more expressive. The ice cream display is also more clearly crafted than it was before. Notably, we can't see Gold Bob and his family off to the right, despite being able to do so previously, and the game now being in widescreen. So perhaps this is another case of relocated NPCs. We can also slightly make out the reflection of Flurry's back sprite against the glass doors back here. And next up, we have Mario and Dupless in the Twilight Trail. The words spoken by Mario here seem to be derived from his voice clips, as we mentioned earlier, and the look for the shadowy version of Mario is also much nicer now, with a really pretty gradient applied over him, rather than just being bright purple. The next clip is Rockhawk taking the stage in the Glitz Pit. This is almost identical to the original game, although the camera angle is a bit different, making it a touch more dramatic of an entrance. And the audience now have new cheering animations, both from the front and the back. And next up, we have Lord Crump in the Great Tree. We can see his Magnus von Grapple robot forming ahead of the boss battle. We can also see the HP restoring block and the save block to the right. And just like in the original game, this HP block costs 8 coins to use. And next up, we have Mario and Koops meeting Hooktail. With the new lighting and graphics, this is a stunning shot. Being able to see more of the inside of the tower helps a lot too, rather than it all being silhouetted and shadowed. And with the new widescreen look of the game, we can see both Mario and Koops, while all of Hooktail can be seen. The sense of scale feels even better than it did before. And moving past the title reveal of the game and into the Princess Peach transition, the transition feels much faster than it did in the original game. It's possible that this is just for the trailer though. And finally, we have Princess Peach and Tech. The overall design of the room feels much more industrial and sci-fi than it did before thanks to the updated art style. The different lights in the screens help illuminate the room too. Notably, Tech is now red like in the original Japanese release of the game, rather than the blue from the international release. And Tech's dialogue boxes also look more digital than they did before. And as we mentioned earlier, Peach's dialogue sounds like her actual voice clips. As she speaks, she turns away from Tech, which she didn't do in the original game, at least at this specific point. Okay, we're almost done here, but there are a few more details that we need to go over. Firstly, the UK website confirms that this game is developed by Intelligent Systems. They're usually responsible for the Paper Mario games, but this confirms that it isn't one of the other studios usually remastering games, like Grezzo, for example. This is in-house, by the same team that normally makes the Paper Mario games. So with that in mind, let's take a second and look at the Paper Mario timeline. The original game on the N64 released in 2000. Since then, the games release roughly every 4 years. The Thousand Year Door in 2004, Super Paper Mario in 2007, Sticker Star in 2012, Color Splash in 2016, Origami King in 2020, and now the Thousand Year Door Remake in 2024. So this being the next game by Intelligent Systems, releasing next year, makes sense. But that also means it may be a while before the next new Paper Mario game after this one. Anyway, when in 2024 could the game come out? Well, 2024 is the 20th anniversary of the Thousand Year Door after all, so maybe one of the old release dates of the game could hold some significance. The Japanese release was on July 22nd, 2004, but in 2024, that's on a Monday. However, the North American release was on October 11th, 2004. And in 2024, that's a Friday. It may feel really far away, but that would be excellent for a 20-year anniversary. Anyway, the final thing we want to point out here is that though it could just be for the trailer, the game seems to be running at 30 FPS, despite the original being 60 FPS. Now, that being said, a super guard is shown off in the trailer, so this shouldn't affect the action commands or the other gameplay elements too much. Whew. And with that, that'll do it for our in-depth analysis of the reveal trailer for Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. It goes without saying that this is now my most anticipated title of next year, and I cannot wait to learn more about this game. After all, what if we get new features, like the other Mario remakes have? What if we get new troubles added to the Trouble Center? Maybe we'll be back soon with another feature exploring that idea. But anyway, what do you guys think? Are you excited for this remake? Did you spot something that we missed? Let us know down in the comments below, and stay tuned to GameXplain for plenty more on Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, and other things gaming as well. Thank you all so much for watching this in-depth analysis. Until next time, farewell everyone.